for another episode of D&D Optimized. I know, I'm super excited also. So welcome everybody to D&D Optimized, part of the D4 network. This is this show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. We crunch numbers about them usually, and we always theorycraft about them and basically try to create a character that is really fun to play in game, but also really powerful. So if you enjoy creating characters for D&D almost as much as playing the actual game itself, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and we are super happy to have you. So thanks for being here. My name's Colby, and I'll be your host. I am actually super excited about today's episode because the character that we've created is a fairly unique character concept for me. And also, even though the character is built to do practically zero damage, which I know is a shocker for those of you who have been watching this show for a while, they might be the most powerful character that I think I've ever made. I've done a lot of burst damage characters on this channel. As I've argued, doing big damage in a single turn to one or even multiple enemies is both fun, I think, but also incredibly valuable from just a mechanics perspective, right? As it can really turn the odds of the battle sharply in your party's favor right at the beginning of the fight, making what would otherwise perhaps be an even match of like 4 of you versus 4 of them into something lopsided in your favor, making it 4 of you versus 3 of them, right? Action economy in D&D is very important, and more often than not, the side that gets to take the most turns, round over round, is going to win the fight. So that begs the question, why don't I talk about control characters more often? I mean, if eliminating one target by killing them is good, wouldn't eliminating one, at least for a portion of the fight, via control, be almost as good? What if you could control multiple targets and take a fight from 4 of you versus 4 of them to 4 of you versus 2 of them, or maybe even 1 of them by controlling everybody else, by locking half of the enemies behind a wall, or putting most of them to sleep, or otherwise incapacitating them? Yeah, that would be amazing. I mean, okay, sure, when the controlled status ends on the enemy, you still have to deal with them. So it's not quite just completely eliminating them forever, right? But it's a heck of a lot easier to deal with the enemy party if you only have to fight, say, half of them at one time, and then the other half after the first ones are dead, right? Divide and conquer. So why don't I do more control-focused builds? I mean, in my defense, I've done a couple. I did a Rune Knight Fighter mixed with a Sorcerer build a few months ago with Treant Monk, actually, that we had a lot of fun with. That character, I think, was really kind of focused on battlefield control more than anything, and I think it turned out quite well, though admittedly most of the control provided in that build dealt with like slowing and snaring your enemies, not necessarily like totally locking them down. I also did an Undead Warlock mixed with a Conquest Paladin, and a lot of you have been asking for Conquest Paladins lately, so anyway, there's one there. It felt, I think, both fun and powerful. It was primarily focused on like fearing and then snaring your enemies. And even like the Fey Wanderer, although it was built primarily for damage, had a lot of really nice sort of similar features as well. But I continue to get a lot of requests for like building the ultimate controller, and I understand why. As I've said, controlling the battlefield and your enemies in D&D can be a lot of fun and is really strong tactically. But I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure what the ultimate controller really means. I mean, there are so many ways to control in D&D, right? You can slow, you can stun, you can move enemies around the battlefield, you can reduce their speed to 0, you can trap them behind a wall, you can even turn them into a goldfish or mind control them. So how do we determine what like the best form of control is, or the ultimate form of control is, right? Is it the character who can disable the greatest number of enemies, or the one who can shut enemies down the longest, or like the hardest? Because, you know, preventing an enemy from doing anything at all is obviously better than just slowing them down or reducing their speed to 0, right? As a person who likes to quantify things, the idea of trying to create like the ultimate controller presents a little bit of a conundrum or a challenge, or at least a puzzle, and I like puzzles, so that's okay. The point that I guess I'm trying to make is that today, for the character that we build, it's going to be one of those rare examples where I don't really think too hard about the numbers. Because when it comes to building like an ultimate controller, I think there are just so many things to take into consideration, and it's difficult to sort of try and quantify it and reduce it down to some sort of usable data point. For me, one of the most important things when trying to create a controller type character is how sustainable their control features are. The most powerful control features, I think, are often spells, but I mean, I don't want the ultimate controller to basically just be the character who uses spells X, Y, and Z. It doesn't make for an interesting discussion on creating a controller character, right? And spells are, of course, limited by your spell slots outside of cantrips. So when I build a controller character, I'm looking for spells, naturally, but I hope to augment spells with other features and abilities that make it feel like you could exert some form of control at least every turn, or nearly so. Meaning that we're going to need a mix of both limited use control features and ideally control features that are usable as often as you'd like. So my priorities are to create a character who has access to the strongest control spells that do more than just slow or snare enemies, but actually totally disable them, as I think that's kind of the strongest form of control, right? Preventing them ideally from harming you or your allies at all. In addition, I want to find a way to exert control over multiple enemies, but also have powerful single target options. So I want some variety, some diversity, as well as, diversity in saving throws and, some charm and fear effects, but some that could work well against creatures that have immunity to charm and fear, things like that. Finally, I want a character who has more than just spells, but who also has some great control capabilities innately worked into their classes or subclasses. Then find other things like feats, etc., to help us in our battlefield control. So a bit of a longish, winding, rambling preamble there, but without any further ado, I am super excited to present episode 62, The Control Freak. Let's jump into the build. At level 1, for our class, we're going to start fighter. I know, but listen, the way that I'm planning on using this character, they will actually often be in melee range. What's more, we are consistently going to be using concentration-based spells. And so for these reasons, I'd like to really have both access to good armor and armor class and shield proficiencies, right? And proficiency in constitution saving throws for the benefit of our concentration checks. And I think the easiest way to do that is by starting with a level in fighter. So that's what we're going to do, and it's really purely for defensive purposes. So yes, when we first meet our adventurer, they are a lowly guard or a soldier or even a mercenary perhaps, but they're not very good at the soldiering life. I'm thinking that they doubt their own abilities somewhat. They might be having a bit of an identity crisis. And they might even be shaken up somewhat by their inability to prevent their comrades from dying in battle. They might be frustrated or saddened or even enraged, I think, at the lack of control that they have in actually impacting the outcome of a battle, in deciding who lives and who dies. They crave a way to exert more control, and they are seeking it out. So that's our seed. As for the race that we're going to start with, I will admit I'm pretty torn here on what race to go with. Yes, there's a feat that I very much want, of course, but I think for this character, we could do even better than a free feat at level 1. I'm not gonna say custom lineage or variant human. I actually have 2 recommendations though. Number 1, the Leonin. Leonins give us a couple of things that are really nice. First up, you get 35 feet of move speed, and that's actually going to be pretty important for our character. Also, our claws are natural weapons, though I don't think we'll be making much use of that. But then we get Daunting Roar, and this is probably the main thing that we're here for. So once per short rest, as a bonus action, we can roar, causing all creatures within 10 feet of our choosing, and that's nice, that can hear us, to make a wisdom save against our constitution-based DC, which that's kind of a bummer. It's the one kind of weakness about this, I think. But if they fail that save, they will be frightened for us until our next turn. This means that they have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls as long as they can see us and they can't willingly move closer to us. if they're frightened. So right off the bat, we get our first control ability. Now, the range isn't huge. We can only use it once per short rest, and it's a fairly soft control. But the other things that the frightened condition brings with it are really nice. It's a nice debuff for us and for our allies. So yeah, Leonin, great option. If you don't have access to the Theros book where Leonins are found, or you're just really not a cat person, I guess, you do have some other fear-based options in like the Fallen Aasimar, the Dragonborn. Unfortunately for both of those, their spell DC is charisma-based, which, isn't much better than Constitution for us. And they both require an action to use their fear as opposed to a bonus action. And in the case of the Dragonborn, they actually even need to take a feat before they can fear, right? There are some tiefling subraces that get some nice control spells. That's not bad, but again, those spells are going to be charisma based, so not fantastic for us. I think my number 2 recommendation here actually would be just to go with a half-elf, specifically the wood elf half-elf, because they also get move speed bonus potentially. We are going to be pretty mad, multiple ability score dependent, and so having all of those nice bonuses to ability scores from half-elf would be fantastic. Anyway, lots of great potential options to choose from. I'm going to go with the Leonin. As for our ability scores, I assume, as always, that we're using the point buy method, and I also assume, as always, that we're going to be using the feature from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that lets us assign the ability score increases from our race wherever we want, right? So with that in mind, I'd recommend starting with a 15 intelligence and taking our +2 there, so we're at a 17, a 14 constitution, a 13 charisma +1, so we have 14 there, and then a 13 dexterity that we mostly need for our fighter multiclass. As for equipment, you are the worst level 1 character of all time. Stay alive. That's all we're focused on. So for equipment, just kind of standard stuff: chainmail armor, a shield, a rapier, so we can use dexterity for our attack right now. Now, of course, some of you may be thinking, why are you wearing heavy armor? You have a really crummy strength score. You're going to suffer a movement penalty, right? And that is all true. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to go with Leonin, because they get 35 feet move speed. And so, yes, if you are wearing armor that has a strength requirement that we are not going to meet, then your move speed is reduced by 10 feet. And that's really the only penalty that you suffer. As a character with 35 move speed, we are reduced to 25, and that doesn't feel too bad. That's 5 feet less than most characters, right? Of course, you could go dwarf in order to not suffer any move speed penalty from wearing heavy armor, but dwarves only have a 25 feet move speed. So if that's the only reason you're going dwarf, there's not really much point. It feels pretty manageable to me. And so I'm actually going to plan on using heavy armor throughout this character's career, even though they're really weak. As a fighter, at level 1, we get the Second Wind feature, and that gives us, once per short rest, as a bonus action, a D10 plus our fighter level in healing. Survivability is super nice, especially when you're the worst level 1 character of all time, so we're happy to have that. And then, of course, we get a fighting style, too, at level 1, which is a not unwelcome benefit. I would personally choose either the interception fighting style or the defense fighting style. The truth is, you are going to be in melee range a lot of the time, I think, as we'll see in a couple of levels, and so you'll likely be in a position to fairly regularly use your reaction to intercept. Interception fighting style, as a reaction, you impose a shield or a weapon, and when an enemy makes an attack against an ally that's within 5 feet of you, and you can reduce the damage that the ally takes if they get hit by 1d10 plus your proficiency bonus. I don't anticipate that you'll be using your reaction a ton otherwise, or at least not for a very long time. So yeah, if you want to be a team player, this is the fighting style to take, I think. Of course, the defense fighting style simply gives us a +1 to our armor class if we're wearing armor, and that's really nice. Despite your decent AC that you'll have with a shield and heavy armor, you will largely be a low hit die caster for your career. And if you're dead, you're not going to be intercepting anything, let alone controlling anything. And of course, by the same token, not getting hit means you're much more likely to maintain concentration on your control spells, among other things. So you decide. I think if it were me, I'd probably take the selfish route and go defense here. At level 2, our character has found something, or perhaps someone, that they think might be an answer to their prayer or their search, to their quest for more power and control. Perhaps it was a magic-using NPC that saw their potential and or consoled them in their grief or rage at their inability. Perhaps it was simply a spellbook that they found or had given to them, which they were drawn to and somehow knew that if they could only unlock the book's secrets, it would give them what they've been looking for. Whatever your reasons, we are taking wizard levels now and shall be for quite some time. Okay, so at Wizard Level 1, we get Arcane Recovery. Once per day after a short rest, we can recover spell slots equal to half our wizard level rounded up. They can't be higher than 5th level spell slots. And this is very, very nice. And then, of course, we get spells. So wizards have access to more spells than any other class in D&D. And there are several good control spell options at every single spell level. I'm not going to try and talk about each and every one. Instead, I'm going to try and focus on my 2 or 3 favorites at each spell level with special emphasis on spells that would help us sort of accomplish the priorities that I discussed at the beginning, right? That would work particularly well for this particular version of a control-centric character, trusting you guys to figure out the rest. So, namely, we're looking for strong concentration-based control spells. And maybe let me just say this now, since I guess it's not always readily apparent to every viewer. Even though our intent and focus for this character is for maximum control of the enemy in combat, please don't just assume that this means that I think you should always just use control spells and never throw out a good old-fashioned fireball or even magic missile when the situation calls for it, right? You are a wizard. Be a wizard. Do all of the good wizard things, not just some of them. You just happen to be really, really good at locking down your enemies. But that's not the only thing that you should do. Unless, of course, you really want to play your character as sort of a pacifist, non-violent type who refuses to enact violence on another creature, though are for some reason okay with holding their enemies down while their friend enacts violence on them. You're the worst conscientious objector ever. But yeah, in that case, go for it. As for cantrips that we get here at level 1, my favorite here for our purposes is Mind Sliver. As an action, you hit one enemy within 60 feet with a spike of psychic energy, and unless they make an intelligence saving throw, which is very unlikely for most enemies in Dungeons & Dragons, they take 1d6 in psychic damage and have to subtract 1d4 from their next saving throw. The damage scales like all cantrips. And so here we have a nice little move where you could run in, Mind Sliver as an action, and then hit a group within 10 feet of you anyway with your Daunting Roar as a bonus action, for example, and cause at least one of those enemies, the one that you hit with the Mind Sliver, to have to subtract a d4 from their save against it and make the likelihood of that fear sticking a lot higher. This cantrip will be even stronger if you have teammates that are also doing things on their turn that's going to require the enemy to make a saving throw. As for first level spells, my favorites for control would be Sleep and Hideous Laughter. So Sleep, of course, lets you put to sleep up to 5d8 hit points of creatures. You roll 5d8. On average, that's going to be 22.5, right? And then within a 20-foot sphere of a point that you choose, you can put creatures to sleep, starting with the lowest hit point creature, right, up to the amount that you rolled on those 5d8. If they have fewer hit points than the number that you rolled, the enemy just falls asleep, and then you move on to the enemy with the next highest hit points. And if you still have enough left over to put them to sleep, then they also fall asleep, and so on until you're all out of hit points. The enemies get no saving throw, no nothing. They just go to sleep. It's fantastic at early levels. It doesn't scale very well, as we've talked about, but for now, it's incredible. Hideous Laughter requires concentration and only works on one enemy, but if that enemy fails their wisdom save, they fall prone and are incapacitated for 1 minute, meaning no actions, no reactions. They do get to repeat that save if they take damage, and in that case, they'll actually have advantage, because getting stabbed with a sword is super unfunny, and they also get to try and save again at the end of their turn. This is a super strong single target control option and has the benefit of also being hilarious. At level 3, we are a wizard 2, and we get our Arcane Tradition, our wizard subclass. Can you guess what it's going to be? Survey says not chronergy, not graviturgy, but enchantment. Whee! I love this subclass a lot, and I've never used it before in a build, so that's always extra fun. Here's what we read about the School of Enchantment Wizard. As a member of the School of Enchantment, you have honed your ability to magically entrance and beguile other people and monsters. Some enchanters are peacemakers, there we go, who bewitch the violent to lay down their arms and charm the cruel into showing mercy. Others are tyrants who magically bind the unwilling into their service. Most enchanters fall somewhere in between. Some really, really great abilities we get here to help us be the best control freak we can be. First up, we get Enchantment Savant. It makes it easier to copy an enchantment spell into our spellbook if we, come across a scroll or another wizard spellbook, etc. It's half the cost in gold and time. And then we get Hypnotic Gaze, which is really the main thing that drew me to this subclass. Our soft words and enchanting gaze can magically enthrall another creature. As an action, if the target can see or hear us, and is within 5 feet of us, hence the need for heavy armor and a shield, you can basically try to hypnotize them. Look deep into my eyes. If they fail a wisdom save against our spell DC, they are charmed by us. Now, normally charmed just means that they can't attack us or target us with harmful magical effects, and we have advantage on social interactions with them. But charmed very often also comes with additional things, as it does for us here. So in this case, with Hypnotic Gaze, their speed drops to 0 and they are incapacitated, meaning no actions, no reactions. So for all intents and purposes, they are frozen stiff, totally shut down. The beauty here is that once they fail their initial save, they don't get to repeat it. Also, it doesn't require concentration to maintain this hypnotic stupor that you've put them in. The bad news is, to maintain it, you have to spend your action each turn to keep it up. Also, the effect ends if they can no longer see or hear you, or you move more than 5 feet away from them, you have to maintain eye contact, or if they take damage. So make sure your friends know the plan and they are careful not to wake them up. Also, once the effect ends, you can't use that feature again on that creature until you take a long rest. But there is otherwise no prohibition against using this as often as you'd like, whenever you like, and that's actually my favorite thing about this ability. This gives us a pretty strong, if admittedly action-dependent, lockdown ability that we can sustainably use, and that was really important for me with this build. Is it the thing that you should always do with your action every single turn? Of course not. But I would imagine that we would be using it a lot on this character, maybe most of the time. Because again, since it doesn't require concentration, you could and should start combat by, say, throwing out Hideous Laughter on an enemy, locking one of them completely down, and then on your next turn, hypnotize another and keep them locked down as well, possibly throwing out a bonus action, AoE Roar to fear a bunch of other enemies, and really doing quite a bit of control here right at level 3 without spending a ton of resources to do so, and that is gorgeous. So at level 4, we're a wizard 3 and we get 2nd level spells. And there are so many to talk about. I only want to do 2 or 3 that I focus on, or else we're going to be here all day. And again, focusing primarily on concentration spells here, assuming that our action is often spoken for with Hypnotic Gaze. Crown of Madness is great, but it requires your action to maintain as well as concentration, so not my favorite for this build. Hold Person, of course, is incredibly strong. Paralyzing an enemy who fails their save, which is one of the best conditions that you can put an enemy under in D&D. A paralyzed creature is incapacitated, which we've already gone over. They can't move, they can't speak, they automatically fail strength and dexterity saving throws. Attacks against them have advantage, and if that attack is coming from one of your allies that's within 5 feet of the paralyzed enemy, any attack that hits is an automatic critical hit. So yeah, paralyzed is amazing. Or horrendous, depending on which side of the paralysis you're sitting on. Maximilian's Earthen Grasp is one that you don't hear a lot about, at least I don't hear a lot about, but it's pretty strong. You summon a hand in an unoccupied space, and then it reaches for one creature that's within 5 feet of it. If that creature fails a strength save, so among the stronger saves for most enemies, but they will take 2d6 damage and they are restrained, meaning no move speed. Attacks against them have advantage, and their attacks have disadvantage, as do their dexterity saving throws. As an action, you could try and crush them for a little bit more damage, but I assume our action is spoken for. It's not a ton of damage anyway. That enemy will stay restrained as long as you maintain concentration, but they do get another saving throw each turn if they use their action for it. The really nice thing, though, about this spell, I think, is that you can move the hand and repeat the grasp with an action. If the creature you have restrained either breaks out of it and runs away, or they die, and you want to continue trying to restrain others. And then we have Suggestion, which is particularly powerful, I think. The duration for Suggestion is 8 hours, and it lets you suggest a course of action to an enemy that they have to follow through with so long as they fail their wisdom save, and it doesn't encourage them to try to harm themselves. Now, this suggestion has to sound reasonable. That sound reasonable bit is the tricky part. That's often going to be open to DM discretion, I think. I have to imagine that, you're exhausted, you should try to go to sleep right now, or your family really needs you should run home and save them, right? Would probably work without question at most tables. Something, on the other hand, like your companions are secretly plotting to stab you in the back, you should try to kill them? I can see some DMs considering that maybe slightly less reasonable. If it works, that's insanely powerful. And if they fail that initial saving throw, they don't get to repeat it. I would actually really love to know, how some of you have used this spell or seen it used in a way that's particularly effective or strong, or, if you've seen your DM shut something down saying that it's unreasonable, I'd love to hear about that as well. I'd also love to hear any really funny stories that somebody might have about when a suggestion spell was used. Maybe you gave somebody a suggestion to run home to their family, but then after the character dropped concentration, or 8 hours later when the duration just simply wore off, they came back and tried to find you and kill you still, or something like that, because that would be awesome and hilarious. Finally, as a second level spell, I'll just mention Web. It's a 20-foot cube that you cast it in, so it's a 4x4 on a grid, not huge, but, it creates sticky webs that are difficult terrain. A creature that enters that area or starts their turn there has to make a dexterity saving throw, or they are restrained, and then they have to spend their action on future turns to try and make a strength saving throw to break free. At level 5, we are a wizard 4, and we get our first ability score increase or feat. So we don't have a lot of uses for our bonus action at the moment. Right now, the total number of spells we could cast as a bonus action if we had them are relatively few, and I don't imagine us using any of them very often while we're trying to stay within 5 feet of our hypnotic gaze target and also concentrating on another spell for control. So I'm gonna say we grab the telekinetic feat here. This is a half feat, so it lets us bump our intelligence by 1. So now we're at an 18. Hooray! We learn the Mage Hand cantrip if we don't already know it, and we can cast it without using verbal or somatic components. That's nice. We can make it invisible. That's nice. And then also, thanks to this feat, as a bonus action, we can try to shove one creature who has to make a strength saving throw against our spell save DC, or be moved 5 feet toward or away from us. A target like your ally can willingly fail that save if they want to be moved closer to you, for example. Admittedly, 5 feet isn't amazing, but there will definitely be times where it will be just enough to move an enemy into harm's way, or perhaps position them for an area of effect control spell you're about to cast, right? Or push them back into a web that they've just escaped from, right? Or move an ally out of harm's way. And moving an ally in this way should not provoke an opportunity attack from an enemy, because the ally is not using their move speed to move, so they should be safe. And that could really help out a squishy friend who is in need of a safe retreat. It'll definitely be nice to have this feature, and while it isn't super strong control, it is something. And it's a nice use of our bonus action that we don't have a lot of other use for anyway. And of course, it got us to an 18 intelligence, so it's pretty perfect for us here, I think. At level 6, we're a wizard 5, and that means 3rd level spells. And okay, there are so many good ones. Again, Bestow Curse I'm going to mention because even though it requires you to touch your enemy, and the enemy gets to make a wisdom saving throw at the start of each of its turns to avoid its effects, which is kind of crummy. One of the things that you can curse them with is to spend their turn just standing there doing nothing. You may think Suggestion is a more powerful spell, and I generally agree with you, except that Suggestion, like many other control spells we've talked about and will talk about, won't work on creatures who are immune to Charm. And there are several others that aren't going to work on creatures who are immune to Fear, including your Roar, of course. So I think it's important that we get plenty of control options that don't rely on the Charm or Fear effect, especially as we get higher and higher level and start potentially running into more of those types of enemies. And Bestow Curse fits that niche nicely. This also has the benefit of not breaking if, say, your allies attack them, etc. Speaking of fear-based spells, we get Fear here. The Fear spell is really strong, so it's a 30-foot cone. It requires a wisdom saving throw, and if the enemy fails their save, they're not just frightened of you, but they have to literally drop whatever they're holding, weapons, whatever it may be, and then spend their turn using the dash action to move as far away from you as possible in a safe manner. They're not going to run over lava or anything. They don't even get a chance to make another save to break that effect unless they get out of line of sight of you, like they can no longer see you. And by then, even if they make their save, they're gonna have to run all the way back, pick up their sword that they dropped right before they can actually even do any serious damage in many cases. At that point, they might just decide that discretion is the better part of valor, right? There is, of course, the incredibly powerful Hypnotic Pattern spell, which I really love because it pairs so nicely with our hypnotic gaze, making us the supreme master hypnotist. So with Hypnotic Pattern, creatures within the 30-foot cube area have to make a wisdom save, or they become not only charmed, but also incapacitated with a move speed of 0, just like our Hypnotic Gaze. There is no save to break it on their turn, which is amazing, although it does end if they take damage or if someone uses their turn to sort of shake them out of their stupor. Wake up! Still, with a 30-foot cube area and on a subsequent turn, your Hypnotic Gaze, I mean, I could easily see you often controlling every single enemy on the battlefield and just letting your allies sort of casually decide, are we going to attack this guy next? Okay, great. Surround them and then go. And just kind of pick them off one at a time in that manner, right? So powerful. But you know what? Maybe just as powerful, I think, is the spell Incite Greed. What I love about this spell is that it lets you choose any number of creatures that are within 30 feet of you, so it's not a defined area, potentially letting you impact even more targets, right? And keeps you from inadvertently maybe casting the spell over an area that contains your friend and thereby hypnotizing them too. With Incite Greed, you simply present a gem that's used in the casting of the spell, and then every creature who fails their wisdom save is charmed and must then spend their turn simply approaching you in a safe manner and stare greedily at the gem. They do get to make a saving throw at the end of their turn to try and break this, and it breaks if they're harmed by your friends. But still, I just love the idea of you holding the majority of the enemy party enthralled, holding out a gem to most of them and then staring into the eyes of another to, keep them hypnotized, while the enemy all just stand there dumbfounded and your allies just pick them off one by one. Finally, I do want to mention Slow. It's one of the best debuff spells in game, I think. You get to choose up to 6 creatures in a 40-foot cube, and if they fail their wisdom save, they're just hit with a whole cornucopia of nastiness. They have half move speed, they have -2 to their armor class and to their dexterity saving throws. They don't get to take reactions, and then on their turn they have to choose whether they take either a bonus action or an action each turn. And they can't make more than one ranged or melee attack per turn. So multi-attack, extra attack, no soup for you. And if they try to cast a spell that costs an action, you roll a d20, and on an 11 or higher, the spell doesn't go off until the next turn, and they have to use their action on that turn to cast it. Crazy. It's not necessarily a hard control like some of the others that we've been talking about, but it can affect a lot of targets and really kind of weight them down in the mud and the mire and keep them from doing lots of things that they would like to be doing. They do get to make a wisdom saving throw at the end of their turn to try and break out of the effect. And this is another great one to potentially use for like groups of enemies who happen to be immune to being charmed, for example. Or if you just really want your team to basically plow through a combat encounter on easy mode. Okay, so normally at level 6, 9, 13, and 17, I do a damage report to report on damage numbers, right? Or sometimes healing numbers or tanking numbers. I'm not going to try to make up a formula here for determining like how much damage you might be helping your team avoid or something. It would just depend on so many things that I just don't want to have to try and come up with an average or a mean or a control group for. But maybe we could instead do something like a control report or maybe a tactics report. Control report sounds like a really lame, like primetime news TV show. I'm Colby Polson, and this is the Control Report. So tactics-wise, I think your strongest move here is basically going to be round one, you run up to a group of enemies, you probably start with a bonus action like telekinetic movement on one enemy if you need to nudge someone into like the area of effect of a spell that you're about to cast, and then throw out the most appropriate group concentration based control spell that you've got. Likely Fear or Hypnotic Pattern, I think. But that could be like Bestow Curse if there's a high priority, like really dangerous big bad. Or maybe if there's a humanoid, Hold Person. Or Suggestion if you're out of 3rd level spell slots. On subsequent turns, assuming that you've still got concentration going, I'd probably be locking down any stragglers that I didn't get in like an area control spell with my Hypnotic Gaze, using a bonus action to roar when I need it, and if I've got it, or to move allies out of harm's way or enemies into harm's way with telekinesis when you need it as your bonus action. Your DM is not going to like you very much. Your allies, on the other hand, will think you're the greatest thing since prestidigitation. Level 7, we are a Wizard 6, and we get the Instinctive Charm feature from the School of Enchantment. It's a fun feature. When a creature within 30 feet of us makes an attack roll against us, so it's just an attack roll, it doesn't have to be a weapon attack, it doesn't have to be a melee attack, you can try to make that attack target another creature in range. If the attacker fails their wisdom saving throw, then they have to make that attack target the nearest creature to them, not including you. Now, if multiple targets are closest, then the enemy gets to choose who that target is. If they make their saving throw, you can't use this feature again until you finish a long rest, but otherwise you can continue using it, which is awesome. This costs our reaction, and of course, obviously, there are going to be times when this is going to be amazing, and there will be times where it's just kind of okay, or even downright bad. If you could choose, who the enemy attacked if they failed their saving throw, like, say, the Cloud Giant rune from the Rune Knight, that would be amazing, right? But the reality is this might end up hitting one of your allies, and thereby causing a bit of a ruckus. Or there might not even be another target in range. What might be even worse is if they're making a melee attack against you, and you use this, and the only other creature in range is the one that you've got under your Hypnotic Gaze. I mean, great, now your enemy's taking damage, but it's gonna break their Hypnotic Gaze. So use this wisely, but be aware of when using it will be really great, because it very often will. At level 8, we're Wizard 7, there are some good control spell options as 4th level spells, though admittedly I think the 3rd level control spells are a little stronger. Banishment is a favorite. So it's a charisma saving throw. That's amazing, even better than wisdom on most monsters. And if the target fails, they're just banished to another plane of existence, where they are incapacitated and remain until the spell ends, which is after 1 minute, or you lose concentration. No questions asked, just gone. The best part, I think, is if the creature is originally from another plane of existence, like a demon or something, then they are, and I quote, banished with a faint popping noise. So yeah, it really makes that sound and they're gone. I love that they included that. If you cast this spell on a demon and the DM doesn't make the noise, you gotta make them make the noise. Make the noise. And in those scenarios, as long as you don't lose concentration before the 1 minute is up, then the extra dimensional being that you just banished just stays home. Also, you can upcast it to affect more targets, which is fantastic. Another favorite, of course, is Polymorph. Obviously, we all love to turn ourselves or our allies into Tyrannosaurus Rexes and cause havoc, but of course you could also cast it on an enemy and turn them into a newt. She turned me into a newt. The only problem there is that in theory, they could take just a little bit of damage, reduce them down to 0 in newt form, and thereby end the spell. I got better. I love the tactic of turning them into something with like 1 hit point and then throwing them off a 500-foot cliff or something for massive damage. The other control-ish spells that we'd get at 4th level, like Black Tentacles, Confusion, Resilient Sphere, even Wall of Fire, for pure control options, they're okay and often do some okay damage in addition to the control, but I think we have better lockdown options available to us at this point, personally. And then at level 9, we are a Wizard 8, and we get another ability score increase or feat. Almost every single thing that we do, for control purposes at least, gives the enemy a chance to save against it. Nothing is more important than getting our spell DC as high as possible, as quickly as possible. Obviously, for this reason, there is a strong argument to be made for taking Custom Lineage as your race, right? And then taking Telekinetic as your free feat that you get at level 1, thereby letting you start with an 18 intelligence right at level 1, and then when you get your first ability score increase, you'd have a 20. At level 5. I just couldn't resist the move speed bump that we got from Leonin, knowing that we'd be wearing heavy armor with a low strength score, and the free area of effect Fear as a bonus action for Leonins. Anyway, it's nice to finally get that intelligence capped now. So, as for a tactics report, not much has changed since last time, actually. The enemy's just less likely to make their saving throw than they used to be. And we probably have a new, best single target control option, I think, in Banishment. And then we have level 10, which means that we're a Wizard 9, and that means we have 5th level Wizard spells. La creme de la creme of control spells as far as I'm concerned. So, okay, Bigby's Hand gets a lot of attention. It can restrain and even squeeze people. Whoa, Bigby's Hand. 4 damage. And push them 25 feet away, which is situationally really great, but Telekinesis is better, I think, the spell Telekinesis, because it can restrain and move all at once and for 30 feet. They don't take damage, but the damage from Bigby's Hand is a little weak anyway. Gesh, the spell, has a nice damage component to it as well, though it's a little bit of a softer control. For me, the 3 big standouts at 5th level spells for control purposes are Hold Monster, Dominate Person, Wall of Force. So, Hold Monster, just like Hold Person, but now it works on any creature except undead, not just humanoids. And again, Paralysis is like the worst condition to be under in-game, next to Dead. The dead condition. That is worse, I guess. Dominate Person only works on humanoids who aren't immune to being charmed, but is the quintessential mind control spell. If the enemy fails their wisdom saving throw, you can telepathically issue commands to them, no action required by you, and they simply do their best to obey. It's almost as though they were, say, like a summoned creature or a skeleton that you raised. You can even use your action to take total and precise control of them, although I would think in most cases having them just obey your specific and general directions, as we're told we can do in the spell description, should be sufficient and leave you with your action free for Hypnotic Gaze, among other things. They do get to make a new saving throw when they take damage, so using them to attack their allies might backfire if the allies fight back. Upcasting it increases the length of time that the spell can last, up to 8 hours. Wall of Force, though, is to me one of the most powerful control spells in the game. You create an invisible wall of force consisting of either 10 10-foot by 10-foot panels that you can kind of shape however you want. They just have to be touching. Or you can create a hemispheric dome or sphere with a 10-foot diameter. Nothing can pass through the wall. It's immune to damage, and it can't be dispelled by the Dispel magic spell. You basically have to cast Disintegrate on it to get rid of it, or Wish, I suppose. It even extends into the ethereal plane, blocking ethereal travel through it. It's super versatile. You can potentially trap several enemies behind it. They get no saving throw against this, and most enemies are not going to have any way to get out of it. It just works. And for that reason, it's super powerful. At level 11, we're a Wizard 10, and we get the Split Enchantment feature from Enchantment Wizards, and this ability is just potentially really fantastic. When you cast an enchantment spell of first level or higher, so no cantrips, and that targets only one creature, so no area of effect spells, but of course those are already hitting multiple enemies ideally, you can instead of one creature target two. Why can't all wizard subclasses be this good? Some of my favorite spells to use with this now for control purposes include, but are not limited to, Hideous Laughter, Hold Person, and Hold Monster. Suggestion would be fantastic for this, targeting two people now. Dominate Person now becomes Dominate People. Oh, and here's one that I haven't even talked about yet, because it's not a concentration spell that persists. It's just a use your action every time you want to do this kind of spell, but it is enchantment and it targets one person, Tasha's Mind Whip. It's already fairly amazing, and now the targets now make an intelligence saving throw, which we love, or they take 3d6 damage, can't take reactions, and then on their turn they have to choose between an action or a bonus action or movement. Like the hold spells, upcasting it lets you target additional creatures. Here's a question. What happens if you hit a group of enemies with slow and then follow it up the next round with this? Can they only take an action or a bonus action every other round? Anyway, so at level 12, I think it might be time for a detour. Some of you may think a detour would be crazy here. 6th level spells are 1 level away. That means Mass Suggestion, among other things. And Force Cage a couple levels later, right? If you wanted to continue with the wizard enchantment route, I wouldn't blame you. Higher level spells are always a good thing. Here's the thing. In my mind, we already have exceptional, fantastic control options, among the best in the game. We have powerful single target control, we have powerful multi-target control, and we even have fantastic non-fear, non-charm control options for those that are concerned about that. And control spells based on lots of different saving throws too. I don't feel like we need a lot more control options, personally. I think what would make this build the absolute strongest that it could be would not be more control options, but a way to help ensure that our control spells stick to the target a little more reliably. If I had to choose between yet another great control spell at this point and making sure that my enemies failed their saving throws against the control spells that I already had, I'd take the latter. No question. So for that reason, we're going to multi-class now. I think that our character has become so good at manipulating and especially charming people that the magic has almost altered their very personality and persona, where they might once have lacked confidence in their abilities, feeling awkward, out of place, long months or years of being able to enthrall and command both friend and foe alike has gotten them interested in honing their previously latent skills and talents, allowing them to captivate an audience with nothing more than their words, perhaps laced with a bit of magic to help. So yes, we are going to take some bard levels here. At level 12, we are a bard 1. And that means we get bardic inspiration, of course. Charisma modifier times per day, so that's only 2 for us right now. We can, as a bonus action, give a bardic inspiration die to an ally, which is a d6 for now. And that ally can then use that bardic inspiration die within the next 10 minutes to add to their attack roll, saving throw, or ability check. And then, of course, we get bard spells. So the ones that I'm going to highlight here are just ones that we didn't have access to before. Unfortunately, as they are bard spells, they're going to use our charisma modifier to the, plus to hit and like spell DC and those kinds of things. So they won't be nearly as reliable, but just for fun. Vicious Mockery is maybe my favorite cantrip in the game. You basically insult someone so hard that they take 3d4 damage now, because we're, at 11th level, it goes up to 3d4 if they fail their wisdom saving throw. and they then have disadvantage on their next attack. I doubt we'll be using this all that much right now since we have tons of spell slots available to us, including a 6th level spell slot, thanks to multiclassing, with a reliable control option for our action, no less, that doesn't require a spell slot. So I just don't think we're going to be using a ton of cantrips at this point. But it's still fun to have and use. Unfortunately, though it's an enchantment spell, it doesn't work with split enchantment because, remember, it has to be a spell of 1st level or higher. There's Dissonant Whispers here as well, which would qualify for split enchantment because it doesn't have to be a wizard spell, it just has to be an enchantment spell. Meaning that for the lowly cost of a 1st level spell, we could target 2 creatures thanks to split enchantment and have them make a wisdom saving throw or take 3d6 psychic damage and then immediately use their reaction to move as far as its speed allows away from you. And yes, this would provoke opportunity attacks from you and your allies because they are using their movement. I would make sure to grab Healing Word as well here. Using telekinesis as a bonus action is fun and often very useful. There will be times where you just don't really have a target that absolutely needs to be moved 5 feet, and there will definitely be times when being able to throw out a 1d4 plus charisma modifier, quick heal as a bonus action to an ally within 60 feet will come in very handy, and that's what we get with Healing Word. Most likely I think we'd just be using this to bounce up an ally who's gone unconscious, right? Definitely nice to have in a pinch. At level 13, we are a Bard level 2. We get Jack of all trades. I absolutely love this feature for utility purposes. It lets us add half of our proficiency bonus to skill and ability checks that we're not already adding our proficiency bonus to. And we also get Song of Rest, which lets us add an extra d6 of healing to anyone who spends hit dice to heal during a short rest. We're singing, or most likely I think for us, telling a soothing story. And our friends just really love to have us around the campfire. All right, Tactics Report at level 13. I mean, bonus action, telekinesis, move an enemy into just the right area and then throw up a wall of force to trap half of them behind a wall that they can't escape from. On the next turn, Hypnotic Gaze, one who didn't end up getting trapped, and then roar to fear any stragglers that might be left. Or, even throw out a Mind Whip that hits the rest of the entire party so that they all take a little damage and have to either move or take an action or a bonus action on their turn. The possibilities are both incredibly potent and seemingly endless. But it's at Bard level 3 where we really take our lockdown ability to yet another level. So yes, at level 14, we're a Bard 3. We get expertise. So pick your 2 favorite skills that you're proficient in and double your proficiency bonus for them. Very handy. And then we get our Bard College, our Bard subclass. And it's the main reason that we came Bard in the first place. Mechanically, at least, because we are going with the super fantastic, never before used on my channel, College of Eloquence. Naturally. Oh, this is just so good. So here's what we read about the College of Eloquence. Adherents of the College of Eloquence master the art of oratory. Persuasion is regarded as a high art, and a well-reasoned, well-spoken argument often proves more persuasive than facts. These bards wield a blend of logic and theatrical wordplay, winning over skeptics and detractors with logical arguments, and plucking at heartstrings to appeal to the emotions of audiences. Oh, this is such a perfect blend, thematically, for our charming, hypnotic enchanter. I love it so much. So, as an eloquence bard, we get Silver Tongue, which means that our persuasion or deception check rolls are always treated as at least a 10 if we roll lower than a 10. We're definitely improving our non-magical persuasive skills here. And then there's the amazing, fantastic, unsettling words. As a bonus action, which is so awesome, you expend a use of your bardic inspiration, choose one creature within 60 feet, and force it to subtract the number rolled from the next saving throw it makes before the start of your next turn. Be still, my beating heart. So, right, you've got a really dangerous enemy that you worry might have a decent wisdom saving throw, but you really need to lock them down. How about we bonus action subtract a d6 from their save and then action hold monster, just to make sure it sticks. Maybe apply the negative d6 to the enemy who looks particularly wise, and then thanks to split enchantment and maybe even upcasting it, let the other enemies that you're going to hit with this fail the spell on their own. This works for any save, so it would even apply for our Hypnotic Gaze. And remember, once they fail that gaze on the very first time, they don't get to save against it again. We just have to make sure that we stay within 5 feet and keep using our action to keep them hypnotized and they don't take damage. That's not always going to be under our control, but still. I love the synergy with this ability so much that although I could totally excuse somebody for just staying Enchanter, like I said, I could also totally excuse somebody for like taking Eloquence Bard right after you hit Wizard 5 and get those 3rd level control spells. Relying on your quite powerful 3rd and 2nd level control spells, Hypnotic Pattern, Fear, Bestow Curse, Incite Greed, Slow, Hold Person, and then diving into Bard at that point to grab this to ensure that your good control abilities and spells stick on the targets that you really need them to stick to would be, I think, a perfectly reasonable choice to make. But anyway, at level 15, we are a Bard 4. I want to stick with Bard for a second. I think there's good cause. First up, we could really use another ability score increase or feat, which we would get here at Bard 4. You know, a smart and or prudent person would probably take Resilient Wisdom here. In fact, they might have done that a long time ago. Our Wisdom sucks. And since we started Fighter, we don't have proficiency in wisdom saves, which means that as the controller, we're incredibly likely to get controlled ourselves by our arch nemesis, Nega Control Freak. Of course, I have never claimed to be particularly cautious in my character builds, so why start now? And honestly, I kind of actually like to build characters with some exploitable weaknesses. I don't know why. Maybe I like the challenge. Maybe I'm too trusting and a kind DM. If it were me playing this character, I would probably just make sure I had Counterspell in my spellbook and like keep my fingers crossed, right? To hopefully avoid becoming controlled or charmed or feared or whatever. So what I would want to do here, I think, is bump Charisma. Because I want a higher spell DC for my Bard spells, but more importantly, I want to be able to use the shiny new toy that we got, the Unsettling Words, more frequently. So I'm taking Charisma to 16. You be the wise one and take Resilient Wisdom. Oh, that was terrible. You take the more reasonable and prudent route. So for that same reason of wanting more uses of Unsettling Words, I'm going to go Bard 5 at level 16 as well, because at Bard 5 we get Font of Inspiration, which means we get our uses of Bardic Inspiration back after a short rest and not just a long rest. So now we have 3 uses of it per short rest as opposed to 2 per long rest, which is way better. Even better, our Bardic Inspiration die jumps from a d6 to a d8 now, making our Unsettling Words that much more unsettling. And then finally for us at level 17, how you finish off your career here continues to be filled with great and therefore difficult choices. I mean, heck, we could actually take a second level of Fighter here and arguably done so much earlier, right? To pick up Action Surge, which would let us, among other things, throw out 2 full spell-slotted spells in a single turn, as long as we didn't cast a spell as a bonus action. I mean, imagine using Unsettling Words as a bonus action, lowering your target's next save by a d8, right? And then as an action, hitting that same target with Mind Sliver, lowering their next save by an additional 1d4, and then using Action Surge and hitting them with Hold Monster or something. Even an enemy with a pretty decent bonus to their wisdom saving throw is really going to struggle saving against you now. Eloquence Bard 6 is equally appealing, I think, thanks to the Unfailing Inspiration feature that they get there. If you really wanted to kind of lean more into your support role, I would probably consider going that route. I suppose if it were me, I would probably finish in Wizard. You know, we get 6th level spells by doing so, and that means Mass Suggestion, not to mention like Disintegrate, Chain Lightning, Contingency, right? But Mass Suggestion works similarly to the already very powerful Suggestion spell, except that it lasts for 24 hours and you can target up to 12 creatures with it. So that's really good. And for our final tactics report then, I mean, we are arguably overpowered. Throw out Mass Suggestion with a bonus action beforehand to reduce the saving throw of the most dangerous opponent by a d8, and then tell the entire group of enemies to like run to Baldur's Gate because there's a massive treasure trove awaiting them there. For those that somehow make their saving throw, you can lock at least one of them down with your Hypnotic Gaze on the next turn, lowering their saving throw by a d8 if you really needed to, or if you didn't, potentially throwing out a roar to fear, any stragglers that escaped your Mass Suggestion, and just laugh as your allies make quick work of any stragglers who are left. There are so many powerful and fun options at your fingertips. And so, final thoughts. I put this build off for a long time because I think if I'm being honest with myself, I was a little scared. There were so many spells to analyze that it felt a little daunting. But once I dug in, man, I had so much fun. I really haven't had this much fun creating a character in a very long time, and I know I say this a lot, but I think this one has risen to the top of my I want to play this next list. It's so different than anything I've played in game, but so powerful. And speaking of that, to be honest, I think my biggest concern with this build is that I really do fear that a character built in this way might do more to trivialize combat encounters than any other build I've done. I know that controlling isn't the same as killing, and your DM could, just fill their combats with enemies that are immune to fear and charm, reducing your control options somewhat significantly. But having the level of control that this character has can turn the action economy of any fight in your team's favor so heavily and so reliably and in so many different ways that you could lock down potentially most, if not all, of the enemies on the battlefield, and it might just be a little game breaking. And it makes me feel a little less bad for leaving in some weaknesses for the character, because you might just need to throw your DM a bone on this one. So anyway, that is the build for the week. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. You are so fantastic. I really appreciate you. I hope that you will like this video if you haven't already, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and even consider joining as a member if you haven't already. But regardless, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again very soon. So until then, take care. Thanks, guys. Then they also fall asleep, and so on until you don't have until you don't have enough. Wow, this is a difficult spell to explain. Until you're all out of hit points.